The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. In Psalm 23, King David personified God as a shepherd. This was imagery that would be well understood by his contemporaries. David himself was a young shepherd when the prophet Samuel anointed him to be the future king of Israel. However, he didn't become king right away. He continued shepherding and his sheep for 10 to 15 years. It's interesting to note that King David did not use any military imagery in this psalm to describe who God is. He did not say, "The Lord is my commander who leads me into battle." These are not the words we read in Psalm 23. The shepherd imagery isn't quite so common today. Very few of us have a flock of sheep back home we need to get home to tend to. And we often skim over this description of God because we're not familiar with it. We may have seen a storybook with Jesus and sheep surrounding him, or we might have an image of a stained glass window where Jesus is standing with a lamb draped around his shoulders. As soon as the lamb enters the picture, our blood pressure drops, doesn't it? How cute, how sweet, how adorable are the lambs, until you learn a little bit more about them. Lambs are known to be slow, docile, stubborn, and not incredibly bright. They're easily distracted, and they'll wander off from their flock without provocation. The shepherd's task is to keep watch over the sheep, to keep them together, to gently guide them to food and water, and to protect them from their aggressors. The Lord is my shepherd. Like David, Moses was also a shepherd. However, we most remember Moses as the liberator, the one who led the Israelites out of slavery, to cross the Red Sea, to approach the Jordan River, and to get them ready for the crossing into the land of milk and honey. But it's imperative this morning to best understand our gospel reading that we remember the call story of shepherd Moses. Our Bible tells us Moses fled Egypt after he killed an Egyptian who he saw beating an Israelite slave. We read that Moses fled to the wilderness to escape punishment and capture from Pharaoh. He rides into the wilderness and meets a man by the name of Jethro. Jethro, we read, was a high priest of Midian, and Jethro extends a welcome to Moses for him to stay with his family. Moses accepts the offer, eventually marries one of Jethro's daughters, and for 40 years tends sheep in the wilderness. It's on one of these outings that Moses encounters a burning bush. He approaches it out of curiosity, and he hears his name called, "Moses, Moses." And he responds, "Here I am." And God then tells Moses who God is, the father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He tells him not to get any closer, and if he does, to take off the sandals of his feet because he's standing now on holy ground. God now sees his people in misery in Egypt, and he's asking Moses to free them, to approach Pharaoh and ask for their freedom, because God is going to lead them to a land of milk and honey, the land promised to their ancestor Abraham. And Moses responds, "Suppose I do this, and they ask me, 'Who sent me?' What shall I say?" And God responds, "I am who I am. Tell them, I am has sent you." And here, God identifies God's self as the entirety of all that is, the very act of being, the perfection of being, as St. Thomas Aquinas so beautifully wrote in the 13th century. Shepherd Moses, after quite a bit of hesitancy and several excuses, agrees to do as the Lord has asked. His 40 years of shepherding sheep came in very handy as he led the grumbling, nervous, anxious, and angry Israelites for 40 years through the wilderness. The Lord is my shepherd. Now, before we jump into today's gospel reading, we need to go back one chapter into chapter 9 of John to understand what was happening. In chapter 9, Jesus is with his disciples, and they encounter a man who is blind. The disciples ask Jesus, "Who sinned, his parents or the man himself, to cause the blindness?" And Jesus said, "Neither. This man was born blind, so God's works might be revealed through him." Then Jesus proceeds to spit in some mud. He creates a salve. He puts it on the man's eyes and tells him to go to a local watering source to wash out his eyes and return to Jesus. The man does just this, and his sight is restored. The man quickly goes to tell his neighbors about what Jesus has done for him, and the neighbors are in disbelief. They take the man to the Pharisees to tell them what Jesus has done on the Sabbath, the day of rest. The Pharisees then question the man's parents. Was he actually born blind? And the parents get a little nervous, and they're like, "You should probably go speak to him yourself." They do. They approach him. And the man spoke up on behalf of Jesus and what he had done for him. And the Pharisees threw him out of the temple. After this, Jesus looked for the man, and the man worshiped Jesus. Now, this is how chapter 10 of John begins. Jesus is telling the Pharisees, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." Now, here's where we're going to take a pause for a quick grammar lesson. I can see you all going, "Ooh." Do we have any grammarians or language instructors in the congregation? I see one hand, two hands, three hands, several hands. Okay. The rest of you, try to stay awake. Stick with me. We can do this. I took my first Spanish class in the 10th grade at Arapahoe High School in Littleton. And 12 years later, I taught my first 8th grade Spanish class in Wichita, Kansas. One of the very first grammar lessons that every Spanish teacher leads and every student of Spanish learns is how to conjugate the verb to be. Any bad flashbacks for anyone right here? Yes, okay. The verb to be in Spanish has two forms: ser, for everything permanent, and estar, for everything temporary. So if I want to tell you about myself in Spanish, I conjugate the verb ser into the first person, soy, I am. And I say to you, soy madre, I'm a mother. Soy hija, I'm a daughter. Soy hermana, I'm a sister. Soy esposa, I'm a wife. But if I really want to emphasize what I'm saying, I'm going to add the personal pronoun I, which in Spanish is yo. So you'll hear me say, yo soy madre, yo soy hija, yo soy hermana, yo soy esposa. In today's gospel lesson, we hear Jesus emphatically tell the Pharisees, when they ask, who could have healed a man from blindness? The ancient Greek translation is ego eimi. Eimi is I am. Ego is the pronoun. Jesus adds the I pronoun, ego eimi. I am the good shepherd. Jesus adds the personal pronoun to add emphasis. This harkens back to God's call to Moses from the burning bush. Jesus uses the same conjugation of the verb to be as God did. He is declaring his divinity to the Pharisees, and they pick up on it. Throughout the Gospel of John, Jesus stresses his identity through numerous I am statements. I am the bread of life. I am the light of the world. I am the gate. I am the good shepherd. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the way and the truth and the life. I am the vine. The synoptic gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke do not mention these I am statements, but John was written many years later. And the author wants to make certain that we, the reader, understood Jesus' divinity, not just his humanity. Jesus was God incarnate, Emmanuel, God with us. Jesus' love for us is beyond anything we have ever experienced. He shares this metaphoric imagery, and we can clearly envision it. Jesus is the good shepherd. We recognize his voice. He laid down his life for us. Jesus' life was not taken from him. He freely gave it for all of us, knowing it would be for our eternal salvation. In Spanish, the word for shepherd is pastor. Yo soy el buen pastor. I am the good shepherd. Amen.